Hello and welcome to this special episode of Latitude, in which we are looking at the end of the year 2022, how it has gone for India in geopolitics and in the geostrategic sphere. And we have with us none other than the distinguished Dr. Sanjaya Baru, eminent editor, analyst, column writer, former advisor to the Prime Minister of India, author of best-selling books, and a distinguished fellow at the United Services Institute, where we are both sitting to take this discussion forward. Well, Dr. Baru, thank you very much for giving us your precious time and being with us here at the United Services Institute and their library, which I've always liked and I believe you're also very fond of, because of the huge collection of literature here, both historical and currently of relevance in geopolitics, geostrategy and military affairs. We are looking at some of the trends that have now come to play. One of the big ones is, after the Ukraine conflict, what is the relevance of the United Nations? And can the UN be the go-to body when the P5 members of the UN, like Russia, do not respect its charters, do not follow the terms of engagement by which the UN boasted they could run world affairs? And where does India come into play? Because there is always a reluctance by the has-been powers, particularly Britain and even France, to allow India in, whereas India is increasingly playing a very big role in one of the areas like the G20.
Well, I have always regarded our pursuit of the membership of the United Nations Security Council as a chimera, as pursuit of a chimera. I don't think the way in which big powers viewed the UN, particularly the UN Security Council, they would have allowed a member to be, a country like India to be made a member merely because we have a certain population, we have a certain geographical space, we have a certain standing as a democracy, etc., etc., etc. You know, we should never forget that the United Nations is the product of the Second World War, in which the UN Security Council was a group of the victors of the Second World War. And we were not seen as part of the victors, even though we kind of implicitly supported the British war effort up to a point. We were not seen as part of the victors. And those who were vanquished, Germany, Japan, have been kept out as well. So to imagine that somehow, you know, the international community will be overcome by this kind of liberal sentiment, that the United Nations has to be a representative body, include, you know, all races, all religions, all regions, I think was always a chimera we were pursuing. And I think over time, the UN has made itself less and less relevant in the management of world affairs.
Briefly, it is being argued by some Indian diplomats, so what, we are not in the UN, and so what, we are a temporary member of the Security Council, but we are G20 president, and that kind of makes up for that loss. Is that true, sir?
That's not true, because the G20 has a certain history of its own. It was a group of finance ministers elevated to the level of heads of government in order to deal with a very specific crisis, which it dealt with in 2008-2009. The track record of the G20 has not been particularly inspiring in dealing with the more recent challenges, whether it's climate change, whether it's the global pandemic, whether it's the international trade. There are so many problems the world economy and the international system is dealing with, and the G20 has not been able to deal with any of those. Yeah. Now, merely because in the rotating system of presidencies, now suddenly we have become president, doesn't mean the G20 has become a far more important organization. Though there is potential, if certain groups of countries come together, and this has been my argument, and I've said this now for almost 6-7 months, and
I've read that.
Glad to see the government is now echoing that if you become a voice of the global south, given the East-West divide, then maybe we can make the G20 a forum where some of these issues are articulated more effectively by developing countries.
Okay, now keeping to that theme itself, You know, India is now a member not only of G20, but also of the SCO, of the BRICS, the RIC, ASEAN, Quad, which is what is the flavor of activities in Delhi and elsewhere. But with the exception of Quad, India is there with the Chinese in all other forums. And even in Quad, it is the only Quad member that is actually facing Chinese troops eye to eye on the Himalayas. So, where do you see India's membership in all these organizations turning out to be something that we can actually benefit from?
Well, I think the importance of all these organizations is that they offer different platforms for us to articulate different objectives. And because we are not in the UN Security Council, we have found many of these other organizations useful in being able to articulate our interests. You know, given our geographical situation, given our economic situation, we are a country that has multiple objectives in terms of, you know, dealing with developmental challenges, dealing with terrorism, with security challenges, dealing with border conflicts with, you know, major neighbors, seeking market access as a very small economy. We don't have a big share of the world trade. So there are multiple objectives that Indian foreign policy has been trying to serve. And I think various forums offer us those opportunities. Frankly, in my view, we join many of these organizations because they're there. You know, I mean, I keep saying that if, you know, someone like us living in Delhi, you seek membership of various clubs, even if you don't have time for all of them, because you want to be seen as belonging to different, you know, groups of affiliations. And I think that's partly India's, you know, personality globally, that till we actually emerge as a global entity, which we still are not, we are still a developing country groping our way. I think each of these forums gives us a certain voice and a certain platform to articulate that voice.
Very well put, sir. In fact, that analogy about clubs is interesting. You referred to it in one of your books also. I would also take 2 points that you made a bit forward. One is the China aspect, and one is trade and engagement through initiatives for trade. In both cases, let's look at China. China is there, it is in a way accepting our presence there, but rather reluctantly. I think some of the intrusions on the McMahon line was a kind of messaging also that don't think you've become our equal kind of thing. And the Belt and Road Initiative and the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is a trade initiative. We have our own observations about it, and rightly so. But can we create a similar kind of initiative with the global South, which sees us as a voice?
Well, there are two different challenges. You know, the China challenge stands, in my judgment, on its own feet.
Right.
India and China need to learn to deal with each other. I think this has been the message of the Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, that we need to have a realistic assessment of our strengths and our position and our relationship, and manage whatever differences we have, whatever unresolved problems we have. Frankly, I think this is a long journey. There is no short-term solution. But this is a journey that both of us have to walk on our own. I do not see walking with any other country as a solution to our ability to deal with the China problem.
Right.
The China problem is not going to go away, particularly as long as the developmental differential exists. They are now 5 times bigger than us, and we need to focus on narrowing that gap. Our economy is our priority. Until then, we need to manage China, and which is what we are doing. You know, there will be skirmishes on the border, there will be tension now and then. But I think managing China is the real challenge for Indian diplomacy and Indian political leadership. Global South is a different story, because there we have common cause with a large number of countries in terms of climate change, in terms of market access, in terms of access to technology, in terms of various other developmental challenges like debt problem, access to investment, technology, So I think the Global South is and I think again Jaishankar put it very well when he said that, we've always been a voice of the Global South. And I think that is our natural constituency, some such terminology used. That's very important. I think we had forgotten this in the past few years when we are kind of thinking of ourselves as a rising power, leading power, and kind of part of the big power league, which we are not yet. And I think there is a constituency there which we need to be able to take care of.
Very well put, sir. I think I'm completely on board with you on both issues. China, we've got to handle it ourselves. Global South, there is a common thread that runs through them and us. More of that after a break, where we look at some of the other issues in our immediate neighborhood where we should not ignore and where we should focus. But that after a break. Welcome back. We are continuing to have the distinguished Dr. Sanjaya Baru with us, journalist, author, former spokesperson with the government of Dr. Manmohan Singh, media advisor there, globally the recognized economist, geostrategist, and everything else that many of us would like to be. And Dr. Baru sir, now let's shift focus to China's other area of interest which is a bother to us, which is the China-Pakistan nexus. It's now an open secret, just like China using cyber attack sources and earlier slipping into denial, but now they're pretty brazen about it. How is it that Pakistan remains afloat economically by other than Chinese financial support by those countries that profess to be friends of India and want to engage more with India?
Maroof, this goes back to the very origin of Pakistan. Pakistan was created by Western powers, by Britain in particular.
Yes.
But I think subsequently had the support of United States and others because of its location. It's a neighbor to China, to Iran, to Russia, what was then Soviet Union, to India, to the Arab world, to the Indian Ocean. I mean, it's a geostrategic location of Pakistan that I think a lot of experts have, historians have written, contributed to its creation and to the support that the West has given it. Even today, the West has not given up on Pakistan.
Yes.
And I think this argument that the West needs Pakistan to deal with China and that China needs Pakistan to deal with India is an argument that has suited Pakistan perfectly over the years. And I don't see that changing. For the challenge for India and Indian strategic thinkers is to be able to deal with this reality. You can't wish this reality away. So Pakistan is a reality, and so is China. The China-Pakistan equation is a third reality, but the Pakistan-West equation is the fourth reality. So there are multiple aspects to the Pakistan challenge as opposed to the China issue. I do still think that we have to deal with China on our own terms in the sense that India-China relationship has to stand on its own feet. But when it comes to Pakistan, the approach has to be far more sophisticated. Because Pakistan has been used by other countries against us. Now China is using it, but in the past the West has used it. How do we create a relationship with our neighbors? With Pakistan, with Bangladesh, with Nepal, with Sri Lanka. We say neighborhood first. But what exactly does neighborhood first mean? I've still not understood. Our ability to create a relationship with our neighbors, independent of our historical prejudices, our communal prejudices, the memory of the partition, etc. Erase all of that, a strategic outlook to our neighborhood, and arrive at a modus vivendi with our neighborhood. How do we do that? That's, in my judgment, the most important challenge for our foreign policy.
Led me exactly to my next question, and that is that in an effort to, as you referred to earlier before the break about us wanting to be on the high table with the big boys, we have ignored, if I may use the term, our immediate constituency and the goodwill that we could have gathered. You might remember in Dr. Manmohan Singh's time also there was a Commonwealth summit in Sri Lanka where Prime Minister Manmohan Singh couldn't go because of the domestic pressures on his foreign policy. But the issue is Nepal, is almost in China's lap. Bangladesh has a lot of engagement with China, including 75% or more of its defense equipment coming from China. Sri Lanka, despite the 3.9 billion bailout that we gave them when their economy was collapsing, still went to China for their first visit after the economy kind of settled. And China, it's just a matter of time, and if good luck doesn't continue to assist us always, Maldives will go their way. So what is it that we need to do in our immediate neighborhood?
Oh, we need to engage our immediate neighborhood at all levels. For example, given a shortage of time, let me pick one example, which is the engagement of the intellectual elites of our neighborhood. Manmohan Singh set up the South Asian University as a way of attracting intelligent young people from around the region to an institution based in India. This place is just not taken off. When I was a student at the Jawaharlal Nehru University 40 years ago, I had classmates from Sri Lanka, from Nepal, from Bangladesh, from our region around us. How many students come from the region around us to India, to study? How many think tanks in India are engaged in building a relationship with intellectuals in our neighborhood? Most of our think tanks in Delhi, I see, are engaging with Americans all the time. There's a huge traffic jam of American and European scholars coming to all these various, so-called think tanks around Delhi, right? How many of them engage people from Pakistan, from Nepal, from Maldives, from Sri Lanka, from Bangladesh? So that is just one example, the engagement of intellectuals. Then a far more important constituency is business. How much of the business community in our neighborhood are we engaging? How do we create a stake for our neighbors in having a good relationship with us? I think this is an extremely important challenge. At one point, Manmohan Singh said in a speech in Parliament that all our neighbors should feel that India is the place to go, for shopping, for entertainment, to watch a cricket match. That this has to be an open country, open to its neighbors, so that they come here for pleasure as well as for cultural and other engagement.
So in fact, brings back memories. Nearly 3 decades ago, I was on a fellowship in the US, and being young and very enthusiastic about India and its future, I was championing the need to the Americans at Foggy Bottom about, why do you keep engaging with Pakistan and why not India? And the question, obviously he was sympathetic to Pakistan, but an American diplomat said to me, how many of your neighbors want to engage with you? How many of your neighbors are comfortable with you? How many of your neighbors would rather go to you than go to somebody else? I think that question still remains unanswered.
No, but it's a question we can easily deal with. After all, how many of America's neighbors love America? Yeah. Right? But the point is, the United States invests money in building relationships with its own neighbors. China has been investing money. China today has a constituency of support in many of its neighboring countries, including a country like Japan. There's a business community in Japan which has a stake in continuing the economic relationship, right? So how do we create that kind of a stake in our neighborhood for good relations with India? I believe this is a great challenge for us, for our political leadership. There's no point blaming diplomats for this. This is something where the support and the leadership has to come from above.
Very true, sir. And I think on that note, not a very happy note, but we'll have to end this discussion. But quite clearly, you've given us pointers from where we can take off. And I always use this term, somebody taught me, that you can do very well if you adopt listening to others and take lessons on intellectual pluralism, which gives you ideas which maybe hasn't struck you when you're sitting on a desk with too many files to clear. But thanks very much for being with us, and thanks to everybody for watching. Until our next episode, goodbye.
Thank you.